The current discourse is a calculated diversion. Media cycles fixate on kinetic events, new jet-powered Russian drones striking HIMARS launchers, as confirmed by recent footage. In response, the Pentagon allocates capital to predictable countermeasures. The U.S. Missile Defense Agency's SHIELD program, awarding contracts to firms like AST Space Mobile, is a public-facing solution to a visible problem. This is kinetic theater, designed to absorb attention and capital, while the true vector of attack remains unobserved. The strategic liability is not the explosion you can see, but the silence you cannot. While conventional assets are hardened against kinetic impact, the entire Western military economic apparatus runs on a fragile, unhardened nervous system. Data. CSS reports confirm the primary non-nuclear threat is the targeted severance of this system. The two primary attack surfaces are not military bases. They are the deep ocean floor and low Earth orbit. This is the blueprint for creating a blind Leviathan. A nation-state's military power, its carrier groups, its stealth fighters, its networked ground forces, is nullified without constant data flow from satellites and undersea cables. An Aegis-class destroyer without satellite linkage is a multi-billion-dollar floating target with a reaction time measured in minutes, not milliseconds. The objective is not to sink the asset. The objective is to make the asset deaf, dumb, and blind. It induces a state of strategic paralysis. This strategy bypasses kinetic defense to impose a systemic solvency crisis. The cost of neutralizing a multi-billion-dollar satellite constellation via directed energy or blinding agents is orders of magnitude lower than the cost of deploying it. According to RUSI analysis, severing key subsea data conduits requires minimal investment for maximum systemic disruption. It transforms high-tech military superiority into an unsustainable economic liability, forcing the blind Leviathan to escalate, not out of aggression, but out of a mathematical certainty that it is losing an economic war it was never designed to fight. A state does not go to war to break even. It goes to war for a return on investment. When the kinetic phase of a conflict generates a negative cash flow, the war transforms from a geopolitical gambit into a national solvency crisis. The primary motive is no longer victory, but survival. This is the precise vector Russia is on. CSIS analysis confirms that the war has metastasized into a significant domestic liability. An unpopular conflict, bleeding the state's coffers, creates immense internal pressure. The political calculus becomes zero-sum. Either the war ends or the regime does. This is not a battlefield problem. It is a balance sheet problem. When a conventionally superior power begins to bleed economically, its first move is not to retreat, but to radically lower its kinetic cost. This is not a choice. It is a mathematical imperative. Weakness forces a pivot to asymmetry. We now have confirmation that Russia has begun deploying new, jet-powered one-way attack drones. Official footage documents these systems striking high-value Ukrainian HIMARS launchers. The economic equation is brutal and irrefutable. A disposable, low-cost drone neutralizes a multi-million-dollar high-tech asset. This is not a tactical innovation. It is an act of economic desperation, a forced adaptation to an unwinnable solvency crisis. They are arbitraging the cost of modern warfare. The central vulnerability is not military, it is fiscal. The entire model of Western force projection is predicated on technological overmatch, a blueprint that has become a systemic economic liability. According to analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, the kinetic cost exchange is fundamentally broken. The math is irrefutable. A $5 million main battle tank is neutralized by a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a battle. It is an arbitrage against a nation's solvency. Military strategists at institutions like CSIS label this the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting lethal, standoff force has collapsed. It no longer requires a state-level industrial base. A non-state actor can now leverage commercial, off-the-shelf hardware to inflict strategic-level costs on a superpower. Every Patriot missile fired to intercept a cheap drone creates a multi-million-dollar deficit. This is not warfare, it is a liquidity drain, forcing a solvency crisis on the defender. For every high-value asset, a conventional power fields, from HIMARS launchers, as observed in recent Russian operations, to advanced naval vessels, the adversary can field thousands of low-cost, disposable threats. This asymmetry creates an unwinnable game of attrition, waged not against an army, but against a balance sheet. The technologically superior power is bled dry, forced to choose between fiscal collapse or escalating the conflict to a domain where cost per kill becomes irrelevant: the nuclear threshold. The regional instability you are being shown is not the crisis, it is the stage. These territories, from collapsing states to politically fractured Western nations, are being repurposed as gray zone laboratories. They are proxy battlefields where the financial solvency of a superpower is tested to failure. While legacy media points to internal strife, strategic analysts at RUSI note these zones are cultivated as low-risk environments to perfect the kinetic cost-exchange ratio. The math doesn't lie. The blueprint is already executing in plain sight. Recent footage confirms Russia is deploying new, low-cost, jet-powered attack drones. The specific target, a high-value American-made HIMARS launcher. This is not a random act of war, it is a calculated economic transaction. A disposable drone, costing thousands, neutralizes a multi-million-dollar strategic asset. This asymmetric model, proven in Ukraine and theorized for flashpoints like Iran, is designed for one purpose: to inflict a systemic, unsustainable economic bleed on a conventionally superior adversary. This forces the target's hand, triggering a solvency crisis in its defense architecture. The response is not to build better tanks, but to desperately re-engineer the entire sensor-to-shooter protocol. The U.S. Missile Defense Agency awarding a prime contract position to a commercial entity, AST SpaceMobile, for its SHIELD program is the receipt. This is a move to decentralize a vulnerable, high-cost satellite architecture, a direct reaction to the threat of being swarmed into bankruptcy by cheap, disposable weapons staged from unaccountable gray zones. The inevitable next phase is the migration of this model from military to civilian infrastructure. Expect deniable, gray zone attacks on commercial shipping, energy pipelines, and communication hubs. The objective is to make the daily operation of a modern economy a financial liability. As the kinetic cost becomes unbearable and conventional responses prove fiscally impossible, the pressure vector shifts. The final option becomes a launch-on-warning posture, escalating towards the nuclear threshold not out of aggression, but as the only logical escape from an economic death spiral. The doctrine is designated launch on warning. It is a protocol of last resort, engineered to solve the decapitation problem. A state launches its strategic arsenal the moment its early warning systems detect an inbound nuclear strike. The logic is a function of brutal, zero-sum physics. You either use your assets or you lose them on the ground. This entire framework is predicated on one fragile assumption, that you can trust what your sensors are telling you. Enter the fog of digital war. A strategic cyber attack is the ultimate asymmetric vector. It does not require a kinetic impact. According to analysts at CSIS, the objective is not to destroy the radar, but to blind it, or worse, to feed it false positives. to create crippling uncertainty. This transforms an early warning system from a strategic asset into a systemic liability. With adversaries deploying new high-speed assets like jet-powered attack drones, the time between detection and impact collapses to mere minutes. In this compressed time frame, a commander staring at a black screen faces a solvency crisis. The data feed is dead. Is it a system malfunction, or is it the prelude to impact? The protocol offers no guidance for the absence of information. The decision is no longer strategic, it is psychological. To wait for kinetic confirmation is to guarantee the loss of your arsenal. To launch based on a digital blackout is to risk global thermonuclear exchange over a potential glitch. Fear becomes the final arbiter. This is the mathematical endpoint. A cyber attack forces a launch decision not out of aggression, but out of the sheer terror of calculated uncertainty. The current defense paradigm is an economic death spiral. While conventional powers invest billions in high-tech defensive architecture, such as the space-based SHIELD program noted in contracts with AST SpaceMobile, adversaries are perfecting the opposite vector: low-cost, high-leverage kinetic attacks. The operational blueprint is already public. Russia's deployment of new jet-powered attack drones demonstrates a clear capability to neutralize high-value assets with disposable systems. When this asymmetric doctrine is applied not to a battlefield, but to critical economic infrastructure, the equation becomes unsolvable. Therefore, the calibration shot is a mathematical certainty. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a synchronized, multi-vector event targeting a primary U.S. commercial port, likely Long Beach or Houston. This will not be a direct military strike. A swarm of unattributable jet-powered drones, potentially laundered through a regional flashpoint like Iran, will induce a cascading failure. The kinetic cost will be under $5 million. The systemic liability will be a multi-day halt in operations, costing 1 to 2% of national GDP per week and triggering a solvency crisis in the logistics and insurance sectors. Official attribution will be impossible, masked as a catastrophic grid or cyber failure. The signal is not for the public. It is a P&L statement delivered to the architects of the system, proving their model is bankrupt.